ROWER and SkiErg, two awesomely full body exercise machines that you can choose from, but why would you choose one over the other? Well, let's take a look at that today to help you decide which one you may go towards. If the ROWER has been your thing for a while, then there's a good chance you're looking at and eyeing the SkiErg and why you may make a decision to go down this route. And actually in the comments, I get a lot of the questions of should I go BikeErg or SkiErg as my second purchase. So I'm actually planning on doing another video in which we compare the ROWER versus the BikeErg as well. So that's why we're making this, is because many of you are wondering which machine do I go to next? Or maybe even I'm looking at my first Concept2 purchase, maybe you do ski, or maybe you want some other options other than the seated movement that you get on the ROWER. And so we're gonna just take a little bit of a look at why pick one over the other and what are the differences between the two. So on weight, when we look at the SkiErg, you're coming in at 46 pounds of machine plus 37 pounds if you add the upright stand that comes with it, which is the setup that I have here. If you buy just a SkiErg, it's not actually going to stand up on its own. It needs to be attached to a wall. If you want it to be able to move and roll across the room like I have it set up, you buy a floor stand that comes with it. That takes the weight up to a combined whopping 81 pounds of machine based off of the SkiErg and the floor stand combined. Now, it does add a lot of convenience because it means that you are able to actually move this machine wherever you need to be, which in the garage here is actually pretty important. Now on the ROWER, it's a cool 57 pounds. This is a pretty reasonable weight for this thing. You can move it around, you can pick it up, you can carry it. Generally, it's awkward, but it can be carried. And so weight-wise, machine to machine, SkiErg is lighter than the ROWER. But once you add that floor stand, the SkiErg becomes significantly heavier, 81 versus 57 pounds on the two machines, if that makes a difference to you. Now let's talk price between the two machines. The ROWER comes in at $900 even, plus shipping and local sales tax wherever you might be. The SkiErg comes in at $770 on the machine, so you're getting a significantly cheaper machine, significantly $130 difference on the machine, but the floor stand is $180, which brings the total price up to $950. So if you buy the complete package, you are both heavier and $50 more than the ROWER, which is $50. Now, with any Concept2 machine, you get flat rate shipping of $45, again, wherever you are, so you always have to calculate in that $45 for shipping coming to you. And now, of course, I'm speaking domestically here in the US. Things were probably different once we start to get into more international shipping. And if you're in a different country, I know that it's varied in all places around the world. So you've got that $45 shipping, plus you have to consider the local sales tax that is going to add on top of that. So just because this is an easy number, we're looking at $900 plus 45 for shipping, that's $945. Then plus whatever your local sales tax is, that is what you're going to end up paying for a ROWER. On this end, $770 plus that 45, that's $815 plus local sales tax. So this is just, I wanted you to start understanding the numbers between the two. Cost-wise, if you plan on just mounting this to a wall, well, you've got a far more cost-effective option here for this machine. Next, let's take a look at dimensions on the two machines. Now, it's important to note that apples to apples, it's a little bit tough on dimensions because the SkiErg is used in an upright position, so its height is its usable height, whereas the storage height on this is not its actual space when you use it. You need to take that height and then turn that horizontally for a horizontal measurement. But let's just go at this and try to make it as apples to apples as possible. This machine is 8 feet, almost exactly front to back, top to bottom, however you want to see it. This machine is just a shade over 7 feet, so almost a foot difference on the height between these two. Now, again, you got to take this into consideration. You're going to take 8 feet and turn it horizontally. So if you're going to be storing it vertically, you have a vertical storage height of 8 feet, which in my garage can be a struggle at times because I do have lower ceilings in here. And then you put it down, you need 8 feet of floor space to be able to handle the length of that. Now on the SkiErg, again, you've got 7 feet of height. When it comes to adding that floor stand though, you add 50 inches of, I guess, length front to back, and then 23 inches of width on that floor stand. So you have a smaller, more compact floor plan with this, even with the floor stand. So size-wise, you actually end up with a little bit more space to work around in, whatever your setting may be. So those are the specs of these machines, but those are really just the surface level. Like, let's just look at what the paper says about it. Taking into account now a little bit deeper of an exploration, what do the two machines really offer that are different from one another? Well, as far as build goes, you basically have the same machine. It's the same flywheel that powers both machines. So noise level is going to be the same. You're gonna get the same flywheel feel from, and I've talked about this before, that thoroughly Concept2 feel. That's all you get with this flywheel and all of their machines, the BikeErg, the SkiErg, and the ROWER, all of them feel the same. So you're essentially getting the same equipment, same materials, same everything that happens internally. Now the mechanism here is slightly different because you're getting ropes that create the movement, but aside from that, you basically have the same machine. Now, beyond that, let's talk about what the movement is between these two things. So on one hand, you have the rower. Let's talk classic rowing movement. It is lower body dominant or lower extremity dominant, so it's mostly about the legs. Posterior chain involved, meaning you tend to get more posterior chain engagement necessary for the machine, and it's going to be a core to extremity movement, meaning your ability to contract from core out to extremity is what creates the movement itself, meaning from inside out. That's how the movement works, okay? We're trying to stay tight internally, and then the action comes because everything is tied together to work. Now, let's look at the SkiErg on this. Well, the difference here is that we become more upper extremity dominant, meaning we are requiring more from the waist up rather than the waist down. It is going to be more anterior chain in effort because we are trying to create almost a crunch movement on the handle when we're on the SkiErg. And then from that, we are still working in core to extremity. So they share the core to extremity piece, but they're almost on polar opposites as to how they engage the body. They both are full body, meaning, like, for example, on the rower, you still use your arms, but it's probably the smallest portion, you could argue the smallest portion of the stroke. On the SkiErg, you could argue that the arms are kind of your controlling unit, and so they take up a massive amount of your energy expenditure is in that arm contraction, and you still use your legs in the SkiErg movement or the stroke of the SkiErg, but it is the lowest form of calorie expenditure, if that makes sense. You use your legs the least versus here you use them the most, here you use the arms the least, here you use the arms arguably the most. Core and arms together, you could argue, would be used the most. So that's the difference between them into how your body actually acts on the machine. But now, let's take a look at how you can use them for whatever needs you might have. Now, what I think is fascinating about both machines is that they're really great for being modified to whatever kind of movement you need. For example, let's say that you have a knee injury and you just had surgery on your knee. You can't mobilize that knee because you're stuck in a cast. Well, you can still row and you can still BikeErg with that leg in a cast. On the rower, you could either put your leg on a furniture slider, a skateboard, just set it on the ground, and that leg can stay straight while one leg is working to push. These are my legs in this instance. So I can use one leg to push, create drive, and get a good amount of work while I'm allowing this leg to be stationary and controlled inside of whatever that cast setting may be. Now, if I have that same scenario, I just had knee surgery and again, I'm in a cast, well, I can either stand, and if I have that leg out in front of me and I can manage to keep it straight, I can still stand and get this movement done, or I could sit. You could sit on top of a box or a stool and do a seated movement in which you take the legs out of the equation. Both allow you to get great movement in. That also reminds me, I just thought, you can also take the monorail off on this machine, put a sandbag or a weight in front of the front end of the machine, and you could seated use this machine to row. So both are very manipulatable, if that's a word that I can use here. Jury? Yeah, okay, manipulatable machines that are going to allow you to use it for whatever purposes you have. So physiologically, how are we going to respond to these two different machines? Well, let's take a look at it this way. If we're asking the question of which is going to give me a better caloric burn, if that's a question that you want answered, I would argue that's probably not the right question to ask when it comes to these two, because you're getting such a full body movement from both machines that the difference in percentage slivers there is probably not enough to make a conclusive argument to one giving you a higher caloric burn or the other. Instead, what you should perhaps be considering is how does it actually engage my body and what parts of that interest me in the training that I want? Because at the end of the day, I don't think this decision is coming up to rowers versus skiers. I think this is coming up to you, the person at home, who wants to get a great workout, and you're just trying to choose which one might be more interesting to you, or maybe adding one to your gym at home so that you can get a better workout. Well, let's talk about this. I think that the two machines complement each other really, really well. If you've ever had the opportunity to put these into one workout together, alternating between the two, you can pretty much expect just complete world domination, and you are just going to be a puddle of a human being after the thing is over. Because again, lower extremity, posterior chain, upper extremity, anterior chain. There is not a part of your body that is not getting absolutely crushed between these, and to create a workout that uses both is just plain cruel, but also super advantageous to you if you just want to get worked. They're great machines to use together. So speaking to each machine, with the SkiErg, again, what I end up doing a lot of is, number one, bracing through the lat, the shoulder, the trunk, connecting these two things to make a single unit. And as to borrow a phrase from somebody at Concept2, good skiing is bad posture. You actually end up with a crunch in which it's okay to actually round your posture. We're not trying to stay in the same rigid posture that we think of when we're on the rowing machine. So on the SkiErg, you can actually be a little bit more fluid and liberal with the way in which that spine moves. I would argue that because we're taking that load from top to bottom, I'm not really putting my spine at any kind of risk here. And what I get is this dynamic hip closing movement. And so this is going to, and that's what really taxes that anterior chain, my abs, my hips, my quads, my legs. That's what involves the whole system together, is that big hip closure, because skiing is dynamic hip closing, rowing is dynamic hip opening. So also, I kind of forgot to mention that early on, but those are two big disparities between them. Dynamic hip closing, dynamic hip opening. And those are big force drivers on the machine. So with that SkiErg, I get that connection into the lat. That's going to work on that arm control, which means that I am going to be getting tricep, bicep, forearm, grip. All of that is going to burn, all of that is going to get worked as I'm using the machine, as well as, again, that anterior chain. My abs, my core need to stay glued to my arms. And then I get dynamic hip closing, which is something that's actually a little bit harder to find in the world of fitness and can be a challenge to try and prescribe. The things that I would use to do that as a coach would be, dynamic sit-ups of some kind, or like a ball toss from the floor, but those can be hard to replicate and not very usable over a prolonged period of time. Certainly not in a way in which we could create aerobic activity. So this is one of the few machines that will allow you to do that. Now, when it comes to the rowing machine, we're talking dynamic hip opening, primary leg driver, posterior chain, meaning my glutes, my hamstrings, my back, my erectors, they all have to work to stabilize me. And then I get just this light snap of the arms at the end, kind of the icing on the cake to finish off the stroke. So with this machine, I sit and I'm not on my feet. But at the same time, I also have to be aware of where my body is at all places and at all times. I'm responsible for my own movement. And the exact same thing applies to the SkiErg. And I think this is where people can often struggle with the two machines, is you are responsible for your own movement, unlike the elliptical or the treadmill or a bike, where it just puts you through the movement and just, as long as you move, it'll do it for you. Neither of these machines will do that, and that inherently makes them a valuable and useful machine. So while there may be a little bit of struggle early on, once you learn to do it, you actually gain this really beneficial, oh, I learned something new, brain-body connection, starts to create better movement. All sorts of good stuff happens between these two machines when you use them. So I know the question here is ROWER versus SkiErg, but at the end of the day, we're actually kind of comparing apples to oranges on machines. I think both do a fantastic job of giving you a high caloric burn, because the whole body has to be responsible for moving. You can't just give up the upper body and say, all right, legs, you go do the thing, like you can on a bike. And that's honestly my biggest critique of cycling, is it guides you through the movement, and it's just predominantly legs. You really don't require a lot of core control or arm control or those things working together to be able to make it happen. Whereas with both of these, you being responsible for movement actually creates higher caloric burn because you have to push yourself in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing in the right order, which again, pros and cons. Is it frustrating at first as you learn the movement? Probably. And does it require that you should learn some fundamentals first before you use it? Absolutely. But does that pay off in the long run? 100%, 100-fold over other things. Not just for the fact that the whole body has to work together and you get to create new synapses that fire to learn how to move the body in amazing and new ways, which I think is, far and above one of the things that isn't talked about in fitness, but is really one of the most exciting, is you learning new stuff. But beyond that is just this need for your body to all work together to get the burn that you need and to make the thing happen. And that's, again, where so much frustration comes in. People are like, oh, this machine is just a black hole of energy. I don't get it. But once you do, you're hooked. And many of you may find that. You may have found the rowing machine, which is like, okay, well, rowing machine. And then all of a sudden, one day it clicks. Something happens for you and you go, oh, now I love this thing. I get it. And now it's fun because it's no longer a guess game. And frankly, that's the whole reason that I built Dark Horse, was because nobody was out there teaching you just how to do the thing. And that's at the end of the day, don't you just want to do the thing, do the rowing, do the skiing? Like how, I don't need you to be a rower. I don't need you to be a skier. I just want you to be having fun and getting fit. And these machines are great tools to do that. So ROWER versus SkiErg, I think at the end of the day, it's a toss-up. You probably started with the ROWER, in which case the SkiErg is a fantastic addition to the lineup of machines that you can have at home. And I highly suggest that this is a great machine that you could be considering picking up. And if you don't have the funds to pick one up, that's totally okay. Consider finding a gym that maybe has one in the future and see if there are ways in which you can integrate this into your movement pattern. If you found this useful and you're looking for ways to integrate the SkiErg, maybe you have one into your training, make sure you check out this SkiErg video here. And don't forget, whatever you do, don't forget, subscribe, hit the bell next to it, because I'm finding that early on when a video is published, the first people to jump into the comments are the ones that I can respond to, and the first people that know about our videos are the ones who click that little bell.